Dear participants, dear friends, welcome to our 19th Global Digital Encounter. Fide and TIPSA are extremely honored to dedicate this encounter to artificial intelligence and the audiovisual world. The emergence of artificial intelligence is largely revolving the digital world as such, but in particular the audiovisual world. The entire business of audiovisual world is completely changed. The IP rules may be affected, and therefore there is a major change. This is why Fide and the Transatlantic IP Academy decided to organize today this encounter on this very topic. We warmly thank all the entities that support us all over the world. We are happy to gather participants from the entire planet for this very encounter in order to hear the views of exceptional speakers. And with us, we have, as exceptional speakers, Professor Giuseppina D'Agostino from Osgoode Hall from York University in Toronto, Canada, and Professor Giuseppe MAZZIOTTI from the Trinity College, Dublin, Ireland. We also have with us the coordinator of the Global Digital Encounters, Javier FERNÁNDEZ-LASQUETTY from IE University in Madrid, Spain, who will also therefore be a speaker. The debate will be moderated by Giuseppina D'Agostino, who is also director of the IP Center of Osgoode Hall in Canada. And we will really benefit, we will enjoy the fantastic experience of our three exceptional speakers on this very topic. We should remember that this topic is not only a fascinating intellectual property topic, but this is also a major business issue. The appearance, the emergence, the growing role, the key role of artificial intelligence in the audiovisual represents millions, dozens of millions of dollars or euros as such that switch from a template to another. And this also has enormous legal consequences, in particular in our field, intellectual property, the one we will study today, but there are also other issues connected self-evidently to personality rights, to privacy, and therefore the question of artificial intelligence and the digital world is of course broader than IP, though our global digital encounters concentrate on IP. I wouldn't wish to keep the floor too long, and we are really happy to welcome this marvelous panel today under the leadership of Giuseppina. But I would wish also to leave Javier, Professor FERNÁNDEZ-LASQUETTY, introduce this time in his capacity of coordinator of our encounters, the encounter to which he will participate as speaker this time. I remind you that we are really happy to have this worldwide audience, and you will be able throughout the encounter to intervene through the chat, to make questions, to question, if I may say, our speakers. And this encounter is yours, is the encounter of all participants. For questions we won't reply right away, we will reply them through the chat later on. So please stay with us, stay connected, and we will be happy also to reply to all questions. Javier, the floor is yours, and welcome to our distinguished speakers.
Thank you. So thank you very much for coming once again. As you may know, today I will be one of the speakers, and I will be very pleased to participate in this interesting, very interesting debate about artificial intelligence and audiovisual work. Well, you remember that we are a community, so feel free to participate and enjoy. I think that today for the introduction is far enough, because you will suffer me for the following 45 minutes. So that's enough. Thank you.
Now the floor is yours.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And I'm most pleased and honored to be here with you, beaming in from Toronto, Canada. And as I look out my window, it's very cold. There's a snow blizzard raging, so it's everything they say about our weather. I was really intrigued when I was asked to moderate this panel, as I get to blend two of my favorite topics, AI and audiovisual works, and I'm a big consumer of audiovisual works, all against the backdrop of IP, and namely copyright and neighboring rights. Now, what we're witnessing in the audiovisual sector is in many ways nothing new, just the pace of change and disruption is at galloping speeds, and the stakes are that much higher. In my first book, Copyright, Contracts Creators, New Media, New Rules, I analyzed the introduction of emerging technologies and the copyright implications for creators across the UK, continental Europe, and North America. Now, with respect to the audiovisual industry, I provided the example of, you'll recall, when in the 1920s, silent picture films became talkies, when the new sound component of talking was a new technology suddenly introduced on the motion picture scene and revolutionized, or as we now like to say, disrupted the movie-making industry. This new technology brought forward renewed business models, renewed means of exploitation, and yes, much litigation in the courts. For copyright purposes, questions of who owns what and who should own what, and what did the contracts actually say between the parties, are just some of the questions that were asked and litigated. AI is now the new bold disruptor, opening up new business models, new means of exploitation, just with so many more complexities and possibilities. And so too will be the unresolved questions and litigation to follow. And this is really AI making waves, not just in the audiovisual industry, but also on every sector and in every aspect of our lives and society. Even our social media LinkedIn pages now have deep fakes, calling into question even basic professional interactions. These big social questions need to be tackled not only by the lawyers, but also by an interdisciplinary expert knowledge base. So we need the lawyers, the computer scientists, the ethicists, and many more alongside governments and industry players all coming together. Now, in your reading materials, and I have to say, I really love what the organizers have done with the Global Digital Encounter setup. We've included a report on fostering the future of artificial intelligence, a report from my university, York University Task Force for AI in Society, where I served there as a co-chair and proposed a plan to innovate the university curriculum and build closer ties with academic institutions, government, and industry across the globe, and to study and further discuss these issues, which brings me to the present. So I very much look forward to our two luminaries joining us today, Professor Javier FERNÁNDEZ-LASQUETTY and Professor Giuseppe Mazziotti, who will be encountering my questions soon. And then we get to hear from all of you joining us in the audience. And as Laurent said, please do keep your questions and comments in the chat. We'll encourage your active participation. So please input them, and I'll make sure we take note for the benefit of our panelists. So without further ado, let's get started. So I'd like to kick off with a first warm-up question, if you will. And just as we start to probe into the issues in broad strokes, and the first one, let's get Giuseppe to answer it first. So Giuseppe, what are the latest developments of AI in the audiovisual industry? And what are some of the main IP issues presented?
First of all, let me start by thanking the Fide Foundation in Madrid and all the team for having invited me. It's a big pleasure to join such an extraordinary community worldwide. I'm speaking from Dublin, where the weather is not as beautiful as in my background, but it used to be like this till yesterday, but we hope that the spring will be inspiring as it normally is. I would say recently I worked quite a lot on so-called content platformization. You, Pina, are an avid user of platforms of services, I suppose, without mentioning them, but the largest ones are pretty well known to all of us, and we know that conception of new audiovisual products, can be a movie, can be a TV series, no longer happens in a secretive way, in a way that the film director and the screenplay writer meet without receiving any input. Now we have an increasingly strong vertical integration of audiovisual producers that also own the supplying machine, the distributing machine through which these works are exploited. But what we have observed, not only as intellectual property academics, but also as practitioners and consultants, there is a significant input that is coming from the users, to such an extent that many directors, there is an issue in my view of artistic freedom. Obviously, this is not a big issue for accomplished, very famous, some are also stars, directors. This is more an issue for directors and film creators at the beginning of their career, because they might be deprived of the freedom to create. Many directors openly say, I don't want to work with producer/platform X because I wouldn't be given the kind of freedom I really want to keep. And, so I'm obviously challenged by the technical developments of the past few years, but I'm also intrigued by the increased problems that might arise when it comes to contracts, because there is a multiplication of parties. This should be intriguing for all the attorneys, practitioners who are attending this meeting, because at the moment, the kind of potentially conflictual relationship that existed between the authors and the film producer, that is something that characterized all the film and TV industry, might be extended also to the platform devisers, which create an additional layer of negotiation, of contractual issues that practitioners, I'm sure, are experiencing already. That's my first reaction to your question.
That's great. And what about you, Javier? What's your thinking?
Well,
on that development?
Sorry. Yeah.
No, yeah, just to hear from you now.
Okay, so, well, on one side, well, I share most of the views of Giuseppe, but I would like to put another point of view on it. On one side, what's the industry doing on the AI schemes, etc.? Well, on one side, business as usual. I mean, trying to refine the AI algorithms to determine what are the choices of the users, what can they offer, etc., in an attempt that is always the same, that make the users to use the catalog as much as possible. Okay, so there is a sort of determinism or influence in a certain way to the users, but I must say that it's quite different to the ones that you may find in media or in the fake news related issues, because in that case the purpose of the platforms is to make the people consume as much products as possible in a wide variety of products, because the capability to produce is still limited. I'm saying still because we will see afterwards how they can enhance this. So in a certain way, I share the views of Giuseppe, but on another side, I think that this has given the independent producers an opportunity that they hadn't in the past. Because I don't. You said, Pina, that you are a fan of the platforms. I'm also a fan, and I've seen many films from Sweden, from France, from many countries and the channels have been enhanced in a certain way. Okay, the possibilities for that independent producers of films, right? And on the other side, more novelties in AI related. Well, there's something that is still under research, that is the use of the metaverse for these audiovisual products. Okay, we have seen some products such as music live events and things like that, but some releases in the metaverse, etc. And I think we will see more things like that in the future. Okay, and a third thing that is, well, it's not really fully related with AI, but it has something to do with the business, is the integration of certain people such as TikTokers, YouTubers, etc. All that type of let's say new producers of contents that on a first stage are simply posted or placed in the platform, but afterwards they are integrated so that they become part of the business by creating new products and new creations. Okay, that's my point of view, but from the business perspective, you know.
That's fantastic. So lots to unpack, and maybe we'll get back to some of those points, even on the you know, as you said, I'm an avid consumer of audiovisual works and what that means also for the data that's generated. But before we get to that, one of the things that everyone is talking about is the copyrightability issue here in terms of, you know, how do we protect, or if we should even protect AI generated audiovisual works. Now, I'm just wondering what your reaction is here, what the main issues of consideration are for thinking of whether we should be protecting these outputs, and if there's complexities, what do you think the best way to resolve them are?
Well, you know, this is something that we have been searching and looking. We have seen an evolution on these kind of questions. You know, in 2019 we had the Fide Congress in Oxford, and Manuel de Santos, Professor de Santos, and myself were requested to talk about the Industry 4.0, and we were also requested to show a disruptive scenario created by the artificial intelligence, and we selected the audiovisual business. And the idea at that time was so simple. It's on one side the production of audiovisual works is in a certain way limited because of the fact that there are human beings implied on it, and on the other side there are many other players that are invaded the audiovisual world, that is apart from MGM, Universal, Paramount, etc. Netflix, YouTube, Apple TV, others are in the arena, so they wanted to produce. So is it possible to produce films in a faster way? And we had the conclusion that yes, it is possible, because on one side the technical elements are here. I mean, if we talk about augmented reality, virtual reality, I mean enhanced reality, it is possible to create content without the intervention of a human being. If you go back in the past and you remember the second version of The Lion King, you will see that in that film, well, the lions seem lions, not cartoons, you know. And at that time, and we still have platforms such as This Person Doesn't Exist. So we created this possibility. I mean, it's perfectly possible to create a false actor that works in a film where there is no people. And these, in terms of costs of production and technical feasibility, it was totally it was perfectly feasible at that time. And currently, it is much more. So this will drive us to a new reality, where we will have the discussions that we already have about who is the author, is the machine the author, etc., but multiplied, you know, multiplied in a certain way. But I would like to intervene so much. I would like to discuss this with Giuseppe and with yourself as well.
No, I share Javier's view very much. I come from humanities. I started my career dealing with the rights of musicians. I still do quite a lot of work on music, and so my view of artificial intelligence is still quite skeptical about the real newness of the dilemma that we are being posed. And in many ways, Javier reminded us of this, the fact that artificial intelligence reached an unprecedented level as a concept, but at the very end, that's the reason why I recommended the reading of Professor Ginsburg's article, Authors and Machines. She's, in my view, very strong in reminding us of the fact that we need to perform a very rigorous analysis from a legal point of view if we want to reach the conclusion that a piece of work, including a piece of audiovisual work, is authorless. So, and I think this way that the authors of this piece use is very persuasive, because it allows us also to give a correct dimension, a correct weight to the question. The question obviously exists. The question of whether a piece of work is entirely generated by a non-human author or actor exists. But I would say that in the audiovisual world, compared to other industry sectors, we have an interesting reflection to develop, in my view, because the same way as in the video games industry, which is a rather recent industry compared to movies, we always had a sort of significant distinction between authorship and ownership. That mattered very much in those jurisdictions where authorship was awarded not only a form of economic protection, but also a form of moral protection. Whereas in the Anglo-Irish American system, we have a clear distinction between ownership and authorship. In the example that Javier gave us, it was a cartoon, but I mean, cartoons increasingly look like the National Geographic products because the animals look real. And so obviously, if the lion is not particularly worried about losing its job, the equivalent human is very worried because the actors and actresses might lose job opportunities as soon as these characters rise to prominence. But there has always been a distinction between the output that is generated and exploited in an audiovisual format and the creative input, because normally the creative input in audiovisual works come from a plurality of professionals, and copyright law in all of its versions, the droit d'auteur ones, the Anglo-American ones, always found a conclusion. The conclusion is that ultimately the exploitation rights, the copyright, strictly speaking, belong to whom? To the producer. So the risk that I see is not very much about defining authorship, but protecting those value chains that made the audiovisual sector very relevant from a cultural point of view, from a social point of view. I would say also from a labor point of view, if we look at the performers. So that's the kind of challenge that I see as completely new, because as Javier stressed, there might be a progressive replacement of the performers with non-human actors. That this is something that, as a humanist, scares me.
Yeah. Well, I agree. But something that I think we all agree on the fact that we all are members of the Berne Convention, and according to the Berne Convention, and you have quoted Professor Ginsburg and her work. This was not a system created for AI, for machines, but for humans, right? So that's clear. The question is where to place that type of creations, because, and something that it creates me a very big concern is that if we don't attract these new creations and technology to the Berne Convention, this will be the jungle, you know. So one way or another, we must find a solution for the interests of everyone that is here in that business. From my perspective, the solution of the UK law in Article 9.3 is not the best one, okay? And other possibilities have been explored. That is to determine how the intervention of a human being is sufficient, so that to think that is equivalent of a brush or a pencil or a pen, or it is not. And in that case, to give other type of rights, something that we have done in the past for databases and other creations, you know. So we must find the framework, but we must be prepared to changes, okay? Because if something is technically feasible, this will happen for sure. So maybe we will find in the future two type of productions in the audiovisual world. One that could be done in the traditional way, and others that could be similar to the cartoons, but with a hyper reality that reminds perfectly to the real reality. So this could be the two type of works. This, from my point of view, this doesn't mean that there wouldn't be an author there. I mean, because the director or the producer or someone behind the scenes will move this character. There will be a creator, you know. But it will be a different reality to that we are facing now. And for my point of view, this will happen for sure. It will take a longer or shorter time, but it will happen.
So
yeah.
One question in my view, just to continue, if I have 1 more minute just to add a reflection, is what the role of the law in this fast developing framework should be. Because ultimately, we shouldn't forget, I'm speaking from Ireland. Ireland embraced the same solution of the UK. It's not quoted as often as the UK, but Ireland is very much the same kind of law. And even though it's not been used in practice, it's more like a definition that shows how much these jurisdictions distinguish ownership from authorship. Historically, it's been like that. But we should always think about the role of law from a political point of view, but also from a business point of view when it comes the types of work that we want to encourage, because that's ultimately the role of intellectual property. Because otherwise, as Javier said, not the risk, but probably the outcome is that these kind of productions exit the realm of intellectual property to start falling within other bodies of law that have nothing to do with the rationale of intellectual property. And I think this is exactly what your reasoning discloses. So in my view, speaking from the European Union and knowing quite well the audiovisual media policies of the European Union, I'm pretty sure that considering also the cultural policy aspects in this field, we should expect even more, I would say, activist role of regulators, because regulators will probably make sure that a strong incentive for human creators and for human performance will continue to exist. Because otherwise the risk is, from a competition law point of view as well, is that these large media conglomerates, where even independent creators, independent filmmakers might produce their own works, but with a position that is clearly not balanced enough. The risk, in my view, is that large media conglomerates might become even more dominant than they are. So I see as an inevitable consequence the fact that the jurisdictions like the European Union might react, placing even more burdens. We shouldn't forget in 2018, the reform of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive imposed some quotas even on the platforms that Pina likes so much. Even Netflix now is bound by, 30% of the works that are being offered on Netflix should be European. The risk is probably protectionism, which makes our discussion even more rich, because obviously we see very different perspectives around the world. The US would never do this, but Canada would. Canada is an interesting jurisdiction because of that kind of ambition.
Yeah, so Giuseppe, it sounds like in this landscape ever more complicated, copyright has its limitations to tackle with the big new bold platform economy. And just wondering, just thinking from the little guy, little girl perspective, how can we ensure that there's greater strength and perhaps independence of these smaller audiovisual producers, what can be done in terms of ensuring that there is also more diversity of content that we get, right? And we haven't even tackled the data issue of it all.
Yeah.
Well, something that, if I may say something, I think that the platforms are really interested on have a wide variety of contents. Okay, so it's in the interest of their business, because otherwise they cannot catch enough audience. So there could be a business idea that could be in line with diversity, etc., etc. The same that applies to the production of new films or series. You know, for instance, the new version of Cyrano, if you know it, or the Bridgeton. You know, so is it a remake? Is a recreation? We are facing a new reality, I think, and that type of recreations will continue. But this is always an attempt to catch the audience, you know, and as the platforms and the producers are involved, they will try to produce everything that could be interesting for the audience. Okay, independently from the fact that it comes from Europe, from Latin America, from China, etc. Or the phenomenon of the Korean productions is also an example. No, so not everything is bad in this new market.
No.
This new scenario. Okay.
No, I recently argued in a book chapter I published on the digital single market in Europe, because Europe now, for the non-European listeners, has this ambition of unifying even digital markets, which is a sort of difficult thing for a number of reasons. And I said in an article that players like Netflix or Amazon are doing more for market integration than the law itself, because precisely because of this business priority that is attracting the broadest audiences, they want to be as diverse as possible. And so, as Javier said, the platforms have an incentive, also because of the knowledge they acquire through the data of their users, to know what the users want. And there are many success stories that come from countries that some years ago would have never become like the center of the global attention. I think of Denmark, for instance, that is extremely praised for the high quality of its TV series, for instance.
Yes.
So I totally agree with you. The only risk that I see is that there is a inevitable reduction of the number of movies. For instance, we see, if we compare, for instance, Netflix, the initial version of Netflix was based also on physical deliveries, no? And at some point there was a transition, and Netflix spent so much money on the clearance of rights, acquisition of movies coming from the Hollywood studios and other producers. But it realized that the business would not have been profitable. That's why they became like producers. But there are many studies of economists, of data and analysts that clearly see a sharp reduction of the number of movies being simultaneously offered on a platform for an issue that is purely business driven, of reducing the expenditure of money when it comes to films and products produced by third parties, and investing the money they save there for internal production that is also helped by the input provided by data, but at the same time makes Netflix a dominant producer of the productions that we can access through Netflix. So the risk is the production of a sort of silos model. Disney Channel, Netflix, Amazon. And, you know, I hear from my students very often that, you know, lots of complaints about the fact that they have to pay a subscription fee for several platforms. So they end up spending a non-negligible amount of money every month for all these platforms, because each of them gives access to a different thing.
Yeah, But that's the new economy, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. My grandmother didn't spend so much money in telephone, and currently I have a cell phone, two, three, and that's also the world has changed, you know. But
sure,
listen,
absolutely.
there's something interesting coming back to the strict issue of AI-produced films. Don't you think that this will give the independent producers some enhanced forces to produce because of the limits on the production budget are very it's a very big burden for these small producers compared to the big houses. So maybe the use of the artificial intelligence elements such as the gadgets I've mentioned before will give that independent producers a chance to produce high quality films at a reduced cost. So not everything is bad on artificial intelligence and the audiovisual world, you know.
But do you think that these technologies will be accessible in terms of licensing fees, assuming that the independent producers will not be able to produce these things by themselves?
I think that the technology will be more and more available in the following years. I mean, if you look back, do you remember the edition of video some 10 years ago? It was just for professionals, and currently you have TikTokers, YouTubers, everybody has accessible tools that allow them to produce something that has a certain quality. I mean, it's not a Hollywood production, but it's a very decent production, you know.
So I think
this will happen in the future. Yeah,
it's a good time to also check in with the chat and all of those in the audience. And so, Giuseppe and Javier, what you discussed piqued much interest on initially when we were talking about the copyrightability of AI-generated works. One of our audience members ensures to say that it's important to distinguish, right, between AI-generated and AI-assisted works. And really the solution ultimately will lie in considering what is creative. And so then I'll just read, it would be really interesting to see the CJU apply the Painter InfoPack creativity test to the Irish legislation on authorship to see if the person who made the arrangements necessary for the creation of a computer-generated work could meet those creativity requirements. So
yeah, well, the Irish legislation, as much as the UK one, has been in trouble vis-a-vis the findings of the Court of Justice, even for less, I would say, because obviously they are imposing, when it comes to, since we are talking about the audiovisual sector, don't forget that these jurisdictions, now the UK is no longer a member of the EU, but Ireland is. Don't forget that in 1993, the EU had to impose to them to include the film director among the co-authors. Now, if you read the UK law or Irish law, you find strangely that the authors of a movie are the producer and the film director. There are two, which is the result of this push coming from Europe. So I totally agree with the person who asked the question, of course. The best is yet to come for lawyers, as Javier said.
Yes.
In the next few years, we will see so many things coming together and questions being asked, and courts will have a very important role.
No doubt, no shortage of work for lawyers ever, or our teaching our students.
No, of course, as it will happen with the metaverse. So lawyers, be prepared for the metaverse because there will be plenty of work for lawyers. But let me add something about this question of creativity, or who handles the brush or the pencil, because this is something that we have discussed within the AI PPI some years ago, and I participated in the debate at the national and international level. And at that time, we used 3 criteria to determine whether or not there was a sufficient intervention of a human. I mean, to determine whether or not there was an author, right? And the 3 criteria were the data selection. Who selects the data? I mean, is it the machine, or is it a person that is driving the machine? Independently from the fact that afterwards it will use GAN or other means of artificial intelligence software creation, you know, and that's the first criteria. The second one is the intervention of the human during the process of creation. I mean, can the human stop the machine and say, no, go this way instead of that one, or is it totally independent? And the third one is the selection of the outcome. Who selects the outcome? Is the machine per se, or by him itself, or is a human being that says, I like this, I don't like that? So in a combination of the three criteria, data selection, creation of the work, intervention during the creation of the work, and selection of the outcome, there were some different possibilities that would drive us not in black and white, but in some gray areas to situations where we can consider that there is an author, and consequently there was nothing to discuss about the authorship, and other situations where there is not a clear author, and we should look for an alternative measure, legal measure to protect this work. Okay. And I think that this still is something that could be useful to determine, you know.
Okay, there's a sort of related question coming in from the audience. So from a legal point of view, to what extent can we tolerate the systematic use, if not too invasive, of AI in film creation or staging? And as an example, the use of holograms, special effects, rejuvenation of actors through new technologies. Do you think that AI will be essential as an actor or a director in the future? I know I'd like to be rejuvenated, so thank you for the question. I don't, yeah, what do you think in terms of your reaction to this one?
I think that there is an objective convergence of industries and types of production, and Javier was giving us an example, but the examples are so many right now, and I always try to encourage students to think of the convergence between video games and movies, because video games, if compared to Pac-Man in the 80s, now are in many ways the equivalent of a movie, with obviously a plot that depends entirely on choices or abilities of the player. And now we also have to consider that the same way as for movies, video games are played interactively. So my brother is playing with a player based in Korea or in Taiwan, and this raises a number of issues that are legally also very, very intriguing. So the answer to the question is, of course, there will be an increase in use of these characters. This raises issues from the point of view of human performers. I would say, I'm working in Ireland, but I'm Italian, so Italy is one of those countries where the audiovisual sector is still dominated by the Italian language, at least for 80% of viewers. So you cannot exploit a movie if you do not translate the original text into Italian, and with a very intrusive technique that is dubbing. And the same in Spain, Germany, France. Yeah. Even though new generations are changing, the platforms are helping them with, so at least with the culture of subtitles. But for instance, one of the reasons we have never considered abandoning the dubbing approach is because it gives so much work to actors, to performers, that without that kind of income would not have the same kind of independence to do work, creative work on other fronts. So yes, it's probably true that these fictional characters, these non-human actors, these holograms will be more used in the future, but it has to be seen ultimately, retaking an argument that Javier raised, whether or not the audiences will like this. It depends very much ultimately on the market, on how appreciated these creations will be, and where taste will go, where emotions. I think it's a matter of verifying, it's like we already have like many platforms that target very different audiences. So for instance, on Netflix, we don't find easily period movies, increasingly so, fortunately, but for period movies, you go to another platform. So probably to the dismay of people who don't want to spend so much money, you will find different things on different platforms, but that's exactly what the market has become.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we have the same situation in Spain regarding the dubbing, etc., and the opportunities for actors. And finally, what I feel is that it's more a question of taste, you know, what the people want to see or to watch. Well, I'm in touch with many students as you. The only difference is that I'm older than you, okay? And I really appreciate the new films. But I still like films such as The Man Who Killed Liberty Valance. But if I share this with my students, they say, well, this is in black and white. That's crazy, what's that? And things like that, or any other film of John Ford that was recorded in natural environments, etc., etc. And the young people don't understand this, and they prefer something that is much more spectacular, you know, the cars that fly and things like that. So it depends on what the people or the audience or the people in general would like to see. So in a certain way, we are in a different world. Okay.
So we have someone with their hand up from the audience. So you can ask the question. It's Ayonkunle Faith. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So feel free. You have the floor. Welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Javier. I mean, the discussions have been very good. I was actually thinking of a particular thing along the line of discussion. Now, there is a likelihood, because the law is not settled in this area, there's a likelihood that there may be a conflict across countries. Now, what I mean is this: if some jurisdictions sort of accept AI-created works and they give legal recognition to it, and then some jurisdictions do not accept it, how do you see that situation play out? I mean, from a copyright perspective.
Yeah, well,
maybe for example, what we have in Australia, presently, and the rest of the EU.
Yeah, well, you've raised a very interesting question. That's why I say that from my point of view, we should find out a solution under the umbrella of the Berne Convention, because otherwise it will be so difficult to find a homogeneous treatment for the works that by nature will fly from one place to another one. That's why it's important that we find the solution for these AI creations, AI created works on an international level.
Giuseppe, do you want to jump in on the international instruments?
Well, I agree with Javier on the centrality of the reference to the Berne Convention, the fact that maybe one day it will be reformed in a future-proof manner. I still think that we shouldn't forget and not consider carefully the distinction between authorship and ownership, because from a copyright perspective, the protection of ownership will be more solid and more internationally more accepted and more easily recognized even by courts than authorship, the continental European Berne Convention way. It has to be seen whether this kind of property will be intellectual property the copyright way, copyright protection way, or it will be something that is equivalent and, as Javier fears, could be not exactly compatible with the Berne Convention, but yet well accepted in business, because at some point there will be a convergence of interests. And so the protection of data, the protection of input that makes the audiovisual product successful will be protected through another legal technique. But again, I would like to restate the importance of being extremely rigorous on the conclusion that a piece of audiovisual work is entirely authorless, and the analysis of Javier concerning the relationship between the creator and the machine-generated input is crucial. And again, it's something that depends on a case-by-case analysis.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Any other thoughts, comments? Because I know we're brushing up against time. I'm wondering if before we conclude, we could just touch on the data bias issue, because I know here in North America, that's all we're talking about. So just in terms of, yes, I love that Netflix anticipates the films I want to watch. That makes my life easier, because sometimes I spend most of my time just trying to figure out what I like, right? So that is a good service for us. But at the same time, we all know the undercurrents of algorithms that can be biased and the consequences of that. So I'm just wondering, do you see any issues with that? Like, what could we do to ensure that there is more equality of data in the big platforms that we're dealing with? So any thoughts, any concluding thoughts on this one?
Giuseppe.
And anyone from the audience can jump in too. Feel free.
No, I think that at the very end, someone in the audience, Alina Butuman, reminds us that audiences are ultimately educated also in terms of taste. And taste is a business issue by the offer.
Yes.
So the fact, this is exactly the kind of fear that I expressed a few minutes ago. The fact that data is an element that grows in terms of importance when the amount of the volumes of data becomes like exponential. And so the ability to control this kind of input is something that gives a competitive advantage to a producer, even more so if the producer also owns a platform that is big enough to exploit this. And we know that data is a commercially sensitive element of this of these businesses. So there is an element of trade secrecy that is basically the most important asset in the high-tech world. And we are observing, at least in the European Union, this attempt to make these data-rich companies accountable for what they do in order for them to share a portion of this data with the companies. I'm thinking, for instance, from this perspective of what Javier said with regard to independent producers. The European Union is about to approve two significant reforms, the Digital Markets Act, the Digital Services Act. From this point of view, the Digital Markets Act might be interesting because it actually helps those third-party businesses that thrive in a platform without having access to the data. And the data might become something that third party, maybe small enough, creative enough, innovative enough, might have access to. So in many ways, the European Union, to the dismay of North Americans very often, might become the world leader in advocating these access rights when it comes to data that otherwise strengthen an oligopolistic market that culturally we want to avoid.
Yeah, I agree. So there are two facets here, and one is that raised Giuseppe is very important. I mean, and I agree. Not only GDPR but also competition law and protection of consumers will make the platforms be requested to comply with certain requirements. And this question of data and artificial intelligence in general and data economy in particular has been an issue for the European authorities. And the balance between sharing and keeping the information should be treated under the competition law. Okay. That's one side, and I agree that this has an enormous amount of value because it drives the producers. I mean, it says the producers what the majority or the big majority of the consumers would like to have. So this should be shared one way or another. On the other side, that means the how they show you how the platform may influence you. Well, the influence will be generally to consume as many products as possible. So it will not drive you always to thrillers or comedies or something like this. So the platform will try you to will make you try another product. So okay, one way or another. So don't be concerned about that.
Okay, well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much to our dynamic duo, our fantastic panelists, Giuseppe and Javier. I know that I would love to stay here all day and chat with you more. It's been very provocative and very grateful also to our audience. Thank you so much for your interventions and your very intuitive insights. I'm very honored to have been here with you and able to moderate our excellent panel. And I'm really grateful to the organizers who are beaming on the screen now, so Laurent, Javier, Manuel, and Alvaro too. I enjoyed hearing all about your views and the various challenges, no doubt, that our audiovisual industry will be facing, right, through the various stages that we talked about, from the development and creation to performance and production. And no doubt there are many open questions. And no doubt this leaves room, right, for another global digital encounter. So on that note, it is now my honor to pass the floor to Professor Manuel de Santos, who will be making the closing remarks. And Professor de Santos, it's an honor. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Giuseppina. Thank you, Pina. We do appreciate very much your skills as moderator, you know. I would say that today we do appreciate it even more because you have dealt in a marvelous way with one of the most demanding topics, yeah. A topic that put everything into question, so many things, yeah. I just recall as a memory, who is an author, who is an owner, until where the artificial intelligence will arrive, yeah. Will we see technology allowing everybody to produce audiovisual works for a very limited cost in the near future? Will we need human audiovisual creators in the future at all? Yeah. Are the present international instruments sufficiently fine-tuned to answer all these questions? Even how to approach this matter, let's say, from a more realistic perspective. Yeah? You have opened and closed a Pandora box also, dealing, for instance, with the future of what culture means. Yeah. So I should say that today, every concept, even the concept of creativity and the concept of culture themselves, are at the stake nowadays. Yeah. So thank you, Pina. Thank you also, dear Giuseppe and dear Javier. We are also very grateful to you both. We could have spent 1 hour more just jumping from one issue to another, and we could be very happy listening you. Yeah. Just an example, what you have suggested about the discussion on the Digital Market Act, just adopted, which is probably the most remarkable piece of legislation since 2018. Since so we're very sorry that the encounter takes only 1 hour, but this is what we have agreed with our attendants. So now, regrettably, it is time to close. Yeah, nobody doubts that the exponential explosion of the audiovisual sectors is just amazing. When listening you during this hour, I realized how many things are going to change dramatically in the IP world in the following years. Yeah. But also how many things are going to change in other worlds. We didn't have time to talk about privacy, for instance, a little bit about contracts. We didn't talk about liability, very little about data, but there will be so many encounters dealing with these matters in the following months. Yeah, the Web 3.0 is certainly changing completely also all our daily life. Yeah, so thanks very much to you three for having accepted to work with us, and thanks especially to Giuseppe and to Giuseppina for becoming part of our Encounters family. Yeah? And also, I would like, as always, to thank this time to Xiao Baiyang and Adele Serio, because they have volunteered to be the reporters of this encounter. And you will see the draft of you will see the report just in some days. So many thanks also to all those who have sent questions to the panel. And now it is time to close this 19th encounter. I would like to recall you that our next encounter, the 20th encounter, will take place on April 28th, 2022. For the first time, we will deal with another very exciting, relevant, and controversial issue, mainly forced IP licensing and forced transfer of technology. And this is a topic that it is certainly at the very, very heart of the future of intellectual property. I just recalled today a news from the European Commission saying that the European Union challenges China at the WTO to defend its high-tech sector, yeah, which is mot majeur, Laurent. Huh? This is heavy stuff, certainly. Yeah. So this is just as an example. So be here with us. Take note, April 28th, 2022. As always, we announce the exact hour and the name of our speakers in the following days. Yeah. So thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you to Fide and Tipsa. Most especially, as always, lots of thanks to our Álvaro Rivas, who is our technical master. And everything goes so smoothly. That's a kind of a miracle, yeah. And also thank you to all of you for being here with us today. As it can not be otherwise, we feel very, very close to all those persons who are suffering these days the consequence of war in Europe. So take care and come again with us in 1 month. Do count on you, on all of you, for our next encounter. Thank you for being here with us, and enjoy the rest of the day. And take care, please. Take care. Bye-bye.